One of the proposed reasons for the small number of women in the STEM fields is because of the shortage of women role models in the fields. As you grew up, did you witness a large number of women to look up to in your field?
I actually did not have any women teachers when I was in high school for the sciences or even in undergrad. All of my chemistry professors were all male. So no, I did not have a female inspirational teacher to look up to.
So no, actually I didn't have any women role models when I grew up. I grew up in a dairy town, on a dairy farm about 40 miles east of St. Louis, and the town size was about 860 people. And so my only role models were teachers, and then I knew that there was a nursing profession, and I knew that there was farmers.
No, I'm a first generation person, so no one in my family had even gone to college. I came from a very blue collar area. My dad was a self-taught engineer, so working at GE. So I really had no contact with any female scientists other than one or two female science teachers in school. That was it.
I wouldn't necessarily say directly in my field. I do remember growing up learning. One example I can think of off the top of my head is a female astronaut, Sally Ride, and being like, oh, that's cool. She's, a woman going into outer space. And I think I never really felt that there was a bias, looking back now, to male and female. So I don't know if I really knew of any female biologists that really triggered my interest in the field, but I can't say that I also felt like I was overwhelmed with just male examples either.
So I had a lot of support as kind of a high schooler who was good at math, was good at science. I had a lot of encouragement to enter engineering, but once I got to college, that perception of role models really dropped off. I counted it up one time, and in 9 years of education in engineering, 4 years of undergrad, 5 years of my PhD, I had a total of one female engineering professor.
When you were first considering your career, did you notice that a large majority of people were telling you that this area of study is male-dominated or that it is not a career for a woman?
I heard the male-dominated part, but I did not hear this is not a career for women. And actually, one of my chemistry professors was really honest with me and said, when I was getting ready to go to graduate school, he said, I don't know how to guide you in terms of telling you what it's going to be like for you as a woman in graduate school in chemistry, but what I can tell you is you're as good as any other student I've ever taught.
Let's see, I didn't face that when I was an undergraduate. Of course, it became pretty obvious when I went to class and there were no women in the class, right? But when I went away to graduate school, or when I continued on and went to graduate school, one of my student colleagues in the office told me that I didn't really have any business being in graduate school because I was taking the place of a male who needed to support his family.
So a lot of people, when you tell them that you're a female engineering, their first comment is, oh, well, there are not a lot of women in that, are there? And I haven't encountered a lot of people who will come out and say to your face, why won't you, go home and wash the dishes and stay in the kitchen or whatever. I don't see a lot of that. It's more kind of these implicit assumptions of you're different and you're weird. I'd like to see a world where it's not weird and it's not even worthy of comment. That here I am, I'm a woman in engineering. Okay, let's talk about something more interesting. Let's talk about the research that I do. Let's talk about my hobbies or my other interests, and let's have the fact that I'm a female in science be unremarkable. That would be a goal.
I think that when people get into fields with subfields within their field, that they often choose ones that have a lot of women in them. So while chemistry might be male dominated, my field of atmospheric chemistry has it feels like about a third women, so women are a much larger percentage of the total within that subfield. And I think that when you find, what I've been told at least, is that when you have new subfields within a larger field, those tend to have many more women in them. And atmospheric chemistry is a good example of that. It's a pretty recent field within chemistry.
In your schooling or professional life, have you ever experienced the prove it again bias, meaning that you had to prove yourself many more times than the men in your position had to? If you did, how did you deal with constantly proving yourself?
I'm still what I like to think is relatively young in my career, so I haven't really had that as much. Sometimes it's in the back of my head, but I think that's more a self-imposed phenomenon than an actual existing phenomenon. But that being said, I know it does exist, and depending on where you are, what you're trying to do, the people you're surrounded with, sometimes that is more of a prevalent thing. I've been very fortunate that for me that hasn't necessarily been the way I've had to make it, but I know that that does exist, and many people do have to prove themselves or feel that they have to prove themselves more just to get onto an equal playing field. I was during the time I was writing my thesis, I was pregnant for my first daughter. One of the faculty members in the Department of Chemistry actually told his graduate group that I had destroyed my career because I was pregnant. And I know this because graduate students in that group had told me that, okay? So I heard it then. As a postdoc, I had my second child, and during that process, when I was pregnant for that process, a PI on a grant that I was on was trying to get me fired because I was pregnant, because his feeling was that with 2 children, I couldn't possibly manage a career. And what came out of that really was my determination to show the world that I could do whatever I needed to do. So I was coring in swamps pregnant. I was, traipsing around. I mean, I defended my thesis for my first child 7 days before I had her. So I went to my thesis defense in slippers because I, was not going to put off my defense for that. But, coring in the swamp, came home, ended up started to hemorrhage, had an emergency cesarean. My daughter was on an apnea monitor, and I decided I had to go back to work within 4 weeks or I was going to lose my job. So, yes.
I'm not sure if I dealt with that, but you deal also with imposter syndrome. So believing that you're not good enough to do what you're doing, and that you have to work like twice as hard to be as good as anyone else, and I think that's a real problem for both women and men in the sciences. On one hand, it makes this work a lot harder. On the other hand, it can take away from having like good balance, work-life balance.
So I didn't notice the prove it again concept until I actually started my job here at Penn State. And I think that's because I didn't really come into contact with students. And one interesting thing is I actually have, my husband is a professor of engineering as well. And we are in the same career stage. We actually work in the same department here in mechanical engineering at Penn State. And we both started at the same time. And we talk about how our students treat us. And I have noticed that I have to deal with quite a lot more pushing from my students. I get probably 3 or 4 emails a week from my students telling me I'm wrong about something. And I'm usually not. Sometimes I am, but usually they've misunderstood, but they think that it's appropriate to contact me and say, well, you're wrong about this. And I've checked, and that doesn't happen to my husband. And so in that sense, yeah, I get a lot more pushback and more kind of challenge and more, it's a little bit more effort to establish authority in a classroom. It's possible that I've been very lucky in my choice of collaborators in my research. I haven't really experienced that kind of pushback, but I know that many of my female colleagues have.
The answer is yes, because you're always, I'm always walking into a room, and I have, I'm usually the only woman there, and so I think there's a couple of things that are important. One is that when you speak with authority and confidence. And that's not easy for women to do. I think that's one of the hardest things for women working in a male-dominated field, is to have this confidence to speak up. But you do have to speak with confidence. But really what comes with that is walking into a meeting or walking into a a technical discussion and having done your homework. So when you do walk in, you do have confidence. And so when you present your technical results, you know exactly what, is going on. And so no one can really doubt you because you speak with confidence because you did all the work to get there.
So actually, when I got this job teaching here, I had just gotten my PhD, and I found out after I had been offered the job that it came down to me versus someone else, and the someone else was a guy, and they hired me instead. So I thought that was pretty cool, and if I had not been offered the job but found out that he had got the job instead, then I might feel differently about that question. Where I felt like I had an uphill battle was when I was first hired. They really lowballed me with my salary, and I kind of had the feeling that if they had offered it to the guy, that the salary would have been a lot higher to start with. So I didn't think that was very fair, so I kind of fought back on that a little bit and got a fairer starting salary than what they initially offered.
You never know how other people's perceptions of you might be different depending on whether you're a man or a woman. And so just always putting your best foot forward, doing the absolute best that you can do is just the right thing to do.
Have you ever been assumed to be in a less technical role because you are female? If so, why do you think this happens, and does it happen to you often?
I think what I'm struck by is when I'm asked, when my husband and I are both introducing ourselves to people, and I say I'm a professor, and he says he's a researcher. Then he gets questions about research, and I get questions about teaching. And no one ever asks me questions about my research, which is the main part of my job.
So the answer to that is yes, but not really from my colleagues. I feel like I get that pushback more from my students. One of the biggest challenges that I face in my job is not the support from my colleagues, but the respect perception from the student end. I've had to fight this uphill battle for years. Being a younger faculty member and a female in an authoritative laboratory director position, I definitely have seen a lot of challenge from some male students, specifically regarding like the technical nature of organic chemistry. They just don't trust me, and I feel like I never did anything to not earn their trust. In fact, I felt my track record has indicated that they should trust me and my technical expertise in my field, but there's just always going to be a few students every semester who just constantly try to push that line with respect.
I have been assumed to be a secretary, partially just because of where my office happened to be at the time. I also sometimes get confused for a graduate student because I'm a junior faculty, so I'm excited that I still look a little bit young. So right now I sometimes do get confused for a graduate student or someone else, but usually it doesn't bother me too much because obviously the conversation unfolds and it's easily corrected that I am the faculty, the PI, that I do have a PhD.
Again, I'm going to draw back to my experience with my husband. And so when we go to a party, for example, usually with non-technical people, so people that we don't work with, people that we know socially, and we'll introduce ourselves and say, oh, we're both scientists and we both do this. And it could be that his research is more fun or more accessible for somebody without a background in science. But usually the conversation turns over to his research and not to mine. And I think in part that is because people have an easier time conceptualizing him as a scientist than me as a scientist. And I don't think that's overt. I don't think those people are actively thinking, well, she can't be a scientist, she's a woman. I think it's more of this subconscious bias that people have when they're looking side by side at a male scientist and a female scientist. They will grant the male scientist kind of the benefit of the doubt, and whereas the female scientist, again, it will often be predicated by female scientist. I'm not just a scientist, I'm a female scientist, and that's the first thing people notice and the first thing people have in their brain, and it doesn't occur to them to ask me about the technical sides of my work.
Even though you had to face challenges to get where you are today, do you think that the struggles you had to face will help more women in the future to succeed in the STEM fields?
I really hope so. I really, really hope so. And it's interesting because oftentimes when you are working in a field that has so few women, what happens is that women compare themselves to other women and not necessarily compare themselves to the bigger group. And sometimes that can set up even a competition among the small number of women, which I've seen in many cases. As a matter of fact, more often I've seen harassment's very strong, but biases against women by other women, not necessarily by men. And this is bad. This is wrong. I think we all need to help each other, because I think just the women bonding together and being stronger and supporting one another is going to help more women succeed.
It's probably good for like the women undergraduate here, and then as I do outreach with high school and middle school students, just to see females succeeding.
I think that the more diverse group that we have within STEM, the better it will be for everyone, and the more people of diverse background will enter this field.
Absolutely. One of the classes that I love to teach is Chem 202. It's baby organic chemistry, and it's in Forum, and there are 365 students in that class. A large majority of those students are from food science or nursing or the School of Agriculture, and they love seeing a female lecturer, and the amount of support and amount of thankful emails that I get from these students saying that I'm inspiring them to continue with their field of study is, frankly, it brings me to tears, and it's super inspirational for me to know that even if they don't tell me, that there are female students in my classes who are going to go on to do great things because they saw someone be successful in a position like mine.
Absolutely. I mean, I counsel a lot of women. So even before I became a formal advisor in chemistry, there were a lot of women that would come up to me and say, "Can I talk to you?" I didn't have any role models. Even in graduate school, there was only maybe 1 or 2 women in the department, and I couldn't identify with them. They didn't have families. They were married, but they did not have children, and so it was hard for me to see how I could have a family and still be a scientist in this world. But so I talk to students all the time, and I've had a couple absolutely outstanding undergraduates who, were head and shoulders above everybody else in their class in my office in tears because they were exhausted. They had tried to take on everything that came at them because I think they felt that they had to prove themselves in ways that I've never seen male students feel that they had to do. And we've had some long heart-to-hearts. So what that taught me was when I saw a woman heading in that direction, and one of them now just finished her PhD at Princeton, I remember calling her in her freshman year and saying, I don't want you to do this. You can say no. If somebody gives you an opportunity, you do not have to take every single opportunity that's put in front of you. Let's pick and choose together. Let's talk about these opportunities. Let's think about these things. And let's pick what's best for you as a person, as a professional. Because I think that's the other characteristic that I've seen in some of the most outstanding female students is they feel like if it's offered to them, it would either be an insult or it would hurt them in the long run if they had to say no to that opportunity. So I've worked really hard to try to mentor some other and colleagues of mine as well, not to make the mistakes that I made.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. One of my ultimate goals when I was considering research versus teaching was to, in the teaching world, be a role model for females and be like, hey, you can be totally nerdy and love science and be successful, and it's totally okay, right? And I felt that was a really important message that I wanted students not just to learn science, but learn to love it. And if they loved it, maybe that would persuade a few more people to enter into those, majors in those areas as well.
I think so. I think it's great that, you know, we're really pushing women in STEM, and the more women there are, the younger girls can see in the STEM fields and being successful and really enjoying what they do. You know, sometimes actions speak louder than words, that seeing these people flourishing in their careers and really enjoying what they're doing, I think that's an excellent example, and you know, I think that's fantastic that I could be a role model for somebody. I'm just doing what I like to do and having fun with it. So if that also comes along with it, then that's fantastic. But yeah, I think it does help to see that there are more women in the field and more women of varying ages. Some of the older women in STEM fields, they're hard to find because there aren't very many of them. They're fantastic at what they do, but they've had a much steeper uphill battle than some of us younger women have, although it is still a bit of an uphill battle, but hopefully it'll just be a level playing field here in a few years. That would be fantastic.
I think that what I can do is serve as an excellent role model to the young women that I come in contact with, certainly in whether it's in my classes or in research, and that I can be a role model to them, just as I have been very fortunate to have a significant number of female role models in my career as well.
So I absolutely think that things are improving. I think we've talked about role models. I think that there are definitely more female role models even than when I was an undergraduate, which wasn't all that long ago. I think you're seeing also kind of a shift in culture, shift in attitudes, where it's not as much of a barrier for people anymore. And we aim also, as you know, as somebody that's in a position to be educating the next generation of students, as people see this becoming normalized. The goal is for it to be completely unremarkable. The goal is to say, oh yeah, okay, you want to be a mechanical engineer, you know, I want to be a biologist, and it doesn't matter where you're coming from to be in that place.
Lastly, if a young woman aspiring to be in a STEM field asked you if you think she could succeed being female, what would your advice to her be?
Oh, I think absolutely they can succeed. I think what's important to succeed, though, is to make sure you have a very strong network of people who support you. And that includes your partner, okay, and the partner who values your work and is supportive. And then in addition, all of the, I would say, professional network that you can have, that you can develop. I've had many male colleagues who have been strong supporters of me in my career, and that's how I've done things and gotten places. So my advice is to make sure you get a lot of colleagues who are supportive around you, and that can help you succeed.
Yeah, when I get these emails, or even if I have a student who's struggling and like she doesn't know if she can survive, I always tell her that she can do it. From day one, anytime a student steps into my classroom, regardless of their gender or their race or their religion or anything, they are all starting on the same page, and they all have the same opportunity to succeed and find success. And so I don't think that anyone should be told that they can't do it based on gender or race or anything else. And so I hope that my students feel that support, and I hope that they feel that they're only limited by themselves and no one else.
Absolutely. I think, but I do think that you have to have some pretty clear goals for yourself, and also accept the fact that you're not going to be perfect and you're not going to be able to do everything. One of my best friends from graduate school, who is a full professor at Notre Dame, had said, when we were in graduate school, you're the E-type person, everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. And so I think that is something that, needs to be shared.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. And you just have to, really find your niche and what you're happy with. And if you're happy with it, that's what you need to go with. I think one of the reasons I was successful, looking back through all my journeys, high school, college, PhD, is that I really had supportive people around me. So I would say my piece of advice would be, if you love science, when you make decisions about your career and moving through, pick the people that will support you, right? You have choices all the time of what lab you might want to work in or what project you might attack. think about the people you're working with, and if they're there to help you, or if they're more using you for resources. And if they're there to support you, I would say that's the decision you want to make, right?
Do what you like to do. Don't let the fact that you're a girl and like science be a problem. There's plenty of impactful women even throughout history. Don't let the fact that you're a woman or female, a young girl, stop you. Just do what you're interested in, and just get in there. Just do it.
Most definitely, there shouldn't be any reason for a young woman to think that she cannot be successful in a field. Obviously, I want to encourage all women to pursue whatever field they're most excited about, whether that's science or art, right? They should feel empowered to do whatever they are excited about, that they can succeed if they set their mind and heart to it. So I would never discourage any woman from pursuing any field that they want to.
I mean, I would say that your gender has nothing to do with anything. Your gender has nothing to do with what you are passionate about, what secrets your brain might hold. We don't know who is going to come up with a cure for cancer. We don't know who's going to build the next super efficient high-speed rail line or have that technical innovation, and that could come from anywhere. And I think it's really important that we encourage all people, regardless of their background, and say, yeah, maybe right now the field of engineering doesn't have as many women as it does men, and it may never. I think that's not the goal. The goal is to remove any barriers and say, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. You have ideas, you have contributions, and bring those in, because humanity needs you. Right? We have so many problems that we're facing, and you can help solve them.
And I take this very seriously, and I actually I want to tell you about this organization that I'm a part of, called Wisdom. So this is a nonprofit that I have co-founded, and I'm working with some people at ULAVO. They're a company who has a headquarters in Allentown, and we've been working together to try to start this Wisdom organization, which is Women in Science Demonstrating Outstanding Merits. So the point of this organization is that we've identified a lot of the same challenges to women that you were asking me about today. And it's not just about women in STEM fields in academia, it's also about women in STEM fields in industry. Obviously, I'm not the best person to talk to about industry because I've always been in academia, but you'll find if you do the search that a lot of the same bias, issues, underrepresentation exist in industry as well. And so this organization is a collaboration between academics like myself, but as well as industry members who realize that this is a problem and that we want to help address. So Wisdom is meant to be an organization where we can facilitate discussions and networking and support women in science and STEM, not only from the academic side, but also from the industry side. So it's still in its very early stages. We have a website and some promotional videos that I encourage you to take a look at. But I'm very excited about this organization, and I hope that through talking about the problem and through making it an open talking point that people think about, that at least if you're aware of, for instance, your implicit bias, then you can start to combat that. I think a lot of the issues are also, definitely there are explicit issues, but a lot of it is also implicit, and people may not realize that they have that bias, but it's sort of trickling down through the system. And so if you're made aware and you think about the bias, then you can start to combat it. So I think just talking about it is a good first step.